Well, we're very pleased to be at the halfway mark here in the House. I feel very good about the strength of the first half. Our entire agenda has passed, the vast majority of it on a bipartisan basis. Really want to thank Co-Chairman Houston, Chairman Brown, and our Ways and Means team for putting together a very responsible budget that maintains our healthy reserves, keeps our AAA credit rating intact, and focuses on school funding, teachers, and children, just as we said at the start of the session we would do. The workforce work that in 1002 continues to be worked upon, unanimous passage of that. Our teacher compensation focus will continue throughout the session, and not only through the budget, but also through 1003. We feel like we've done a very responsible job on school safety, both with 1004 and the provisions that were contained in the budget. And Department of Child Services will continue to be a point of examination, both through the changes that Representative Sturwald championed in House Bill 1006 with a 100-0 vote, and also the work that we'll be doing on that in the future in the budget. So with that, I'm very pleased to take your questions.
Mr. Speaker, on the issue of bias crimes, the Senate sent over one without an enumerated list. You talked about doing a list without a list. Are you talking about referring to the reporting statute that has several of those categories that folks have been talking about as a reference in the legislation, or?
Well, we have a draft that was authored by Representative Sturwald here that was a description of categories. And I think that's a better approach. It's the one that I think has an opportunity to pass both the House and the Senate. I did have someone very responsibly gave my cell phone number out to most of the CEOs in the city and the state over the weekend. So I had a lot of conversations, and I understand the advocates' desire for a list. I really believe that there needs to be discussion of compromise in that regard and still have a bill that covers everyone, including those that are desired to be on the list. And I think that's the right approach. So hopefully we can find room for compromise here. The worst way to get people to the table is to say we will not compromise. I heard that a little bit over the weekend. So I'm going to encourage continued discussions. It's my hope, my personal hope, to pass a bias crime statute that gets us off the list this year.
Is that the most important thing? Is just getting us off the list?
Well, I think from my perspective, yes. But for some, I believe there's a conviction that there is real prejudice and that this may address it in some way. And I understand those feelings as well. So I think if we can find the right position for this to pass with the majority of my team supporting it, then I think we'll accomplish all of those desires.
Kind of similar to follow up on my question. We see something similar to Representative Sturwald's approach out in Utah, and they're having to grapple with it because it's basically, as they've said out there, prosecutors have said it's basically unworkable. So I guess, again, is it more important to just get off the list no matter what you pass, or is it important to deliver something that prosecutors can actually use?
Again, this would be used by a judge. This would be used by a judge, not prosecutors. So it's a little bit different than the South Carolina approach. It's a little bit different than the Utah approach. And we'll keep working on it, try to find the right spot.
Are you the Georgia law, which got struck down?
That's what I meant, Georgia, not South Carolina.
Yeah. But in that case, although the law was jury, the case that got the law struck down was a bench trial. So it doesn't matter. This is too vague, even if the judge is doing it. What gives you confidence Indiana wouldn't have the same problem?
Well, two things. First of all, their statute required a separate trial on whether there was a bias crime or not. That is not what the Sturwald bill provides. It's an aggravator in the judge's hands, and if there is any evidence of bias, the judge can go to the maximum sentence on it. So it's a little different than the Georgia approach. The second is there were some constitutional provisions which struck that case down that were specific to the Georgia Constitution that we don't have here in Indiana.
Are you worried, or aren't you worried that this could turn into like a RFRA 2.0 situation?
Well, having survived the eye of that storm, I see it to be a different case here. I just think there were some circumstances for the RFRA situation that were specific to that issue, including national groups waiting for the first state out of 5 or 6 that were working on the issue to pass to pass a statute and have their preconceived protests launched. The only reason it was Indiana rather than Tennessee is they got into a procedural issue in Tennessee that held their bill up for a couple of days. So I just really don't see the same reaction here on this issue. Plus, that was protesting an action taken. This would be protesting an action not taken. I kind of see that as a different take on it as well. So I just don't see the intensity of RFRA. Now, having said that, do we need to pass something that is appropriate? Do I think so? Yes, I do. That's why I said it's one of my personal goals.
Well, you mentioned needing to have a majority of your team. Does that mean any bill that comes forward, you have to pass it with just Republican votes? You're not going to rely on Democrats supporting a measure?
No, it doesn't mean that.
Well, you said majority of your team. Do you need to have?
Well,
Is
it
it
would be
gonna be-
unusual for our caucus to act with a minority of our team and all of the Democrats on any issue, not just this one, any issue. So it's not a rule. It's more of a guideline. Thank you. The only person who's seen Pirates of the Caribbean. We want most of our team to be comfortable with a solution before we pass it.
And does it come down strictly to people not wanting gender identity and sexual orientation in the law?
No, there are plenty of people in our caucus who believe we should take no action on this. It's not a necessity. It's not an issue in their community, and it isn't just about those two categories. It's about whether there's a list and whether we have to take this action at all.
What's the problem with the list, from your point of view?
I think because any list that you have, some people are excluded, and that is sort of the unique solution that Representative Sturwald presents. You could not come up with a category of individual, minority or otherwise, that would not be covered by the Sturwald bill.
Doesn't that make every crime a hate crime then?
No, it would have to be motivated by that bias.
We keep hearing that the list leaves people out. Who's left out by age, sex, race, color, national origin, sexual orientation, gender identity? Like, every single person in Indiana has all of those things. So who's left out?
Yeah, so let's just say a crime is motivated by the fact that a person is wearing a hat with a specific acronym on it. Let's just say that could happen. That would be one example. I could probably come up with 50 for you if you'd like.
But to that end, are you then equating with, like, if I attack someone because they're a White Sox fan and I'm a Cubs fan, that's the same thing as me attacking a black person because they're a black person?
No, I'm not making that analogy at all. That's yours.
Well, it's also the Georgia Supreme Courts, though. I mean, is that a concern? Is that something that the Sturwald bill would rule out?
That's our hope.
Mr. Speaker, there's some talk about teachers possibly doing like a walkout next month if issues regarding teacher pay aren't addressed to their satisfaction. Any worry or concern that we could see what we've seen in other states where teachers literally are taken to the streets?
Well, I find it remarkable that the first time in my legislative career this is being discussed, a teacher walkout in the very year that we declare teacher salaries are one of our top priorities. So it's my hope that we don't see any irresponsible action in that regard. We'd much rather work with teachers, as we have over the summer with several organizations representing teachers, trying to find solutions to adequately pay what I think is the most important professional for the future of our state, our classroom teachers. So hopefully we don't have any of that. I think it just complicates it. Probably makes it harder to make progress on the issue if there's some sort of work action like that.
On teacher pay,
By the way, 15,000 screaming union guys outside my window here and a couple hundred at my house, and that didn't stop us from doing the right thing. So we're going to find the right place to land on this issue, regardless of
on
work
teacher
actions.
pay, obviously, you guys have been concerned about mandating to locals. But also, we're hearing from Democrats or whatever, there's no specific money in the budget for teacher pay. Have you
Well,
guys
first of all, they're
thought
wrong.
about-
They're wrong. Let me start with that, and then we'll get to your question.
Right.
We have $60 million in teacher appreciation grants that can only go to teachers. We have funds both for grants and the career ladder that almost all will go to funds to teachers. Plus, There's $611 million new dollars that are available to go to teachers at the local level, plus the $70 million that will be generated every year in savings through our one-time payment on the teacher retirement. So their assertion is meaningless. It is inaccurate. Okay, now we'll have your question.
Okay.
I haven't. See, if I was on the floor leader, I'd be up saying these things on the floor. So I have to say them in some venue.
I was just wondering if you guys have thought at all, and maybe this is kind of along the teacher appreciation grant
Okay.
lines, but of a pot of money, maybe you put in $1,000 per teacher and let each school apply for that if they only put it directly toward salaries. I mean,
That's a great idea.
that
Do you
would
have
be
a
like
bill? Do you have a
voluntary-
bill drafted on that, Nikki?
I can handle it. But no, I mean, have you guys thought about that sort of voluntary approach rather than the mandate?
Well, we're trying to help all teachers, and a grant program would leave some out, some in, some out. So
Well, not
we're
if it's $1,000 for every teacher.
we're happy with the 1008 or 1003 approach, where we monitor and encourage every school at the local level to make those decisions, but to prioritize teacher salaries. That's our goal, in addition to the significant additional funds, which I heard someone say we were inadequate because it's not 3%. If you add the 2.1, 2.2 plus the $70 million generated per year in savings, that is exactly 3% increase in school funding each year. So we're pretty comfortable with the path we're on. We'll continue to work on the teacher focus issue throughout the session, and hopefully make meaningful progress on that.
You said the grant. You said the grant program would lead some people out, which makes sense. But doesn't the $70 million also leave?
It does.
schools
It's not. Well, it doesn't leave anybody out, but it does. It doesn't. It's not equitable throughout the state. So, and we're looking at that.
So in your eyes, will Indiana's teachers get a raise this year?
Well, they should. We're putting significant additional funds to local units of government or local schools. We are giving them $60 million over the biennium for teacher appreciation grants. We are going to continue our tax credit for teachers, and it may be expanded in a Senate bill that was sent over to us. So, yeah, absolutely. I think we'll make progress. Will it erase inflation erosion of for many years? No, but we're going to try to make very meaningful progress on it.
How are groups that you guys have been working with on the teacher, the ISTA teacher